Ethan Cole returned home earlier than usual that Friday afternoon. Still in the tailored gray suit he wore for a meeting in Manhattan, he stepped into the cool, echoing silence of his Boston estate. The marble floors gleamed beneath his polished shoes. The scent of waxed wood and imported candles hung in the air. Everything looked pristine, predictable, until he heard the sobbing. It was soft at first, a whisper of sorrow drifting from the cavernous living room. Ethan paused, briefcase still in hand, and listened. There was another sound, calmer, soothing. A woman's voice, gentle, patient. He set the briefcase down without thinking. Moving toward the sound, Ethan stopped just outside the living room. What he saw made him go still. His daughter, Leia, 7 years old and hidden behind oversized sunglasses, sat cross-legged on the cold marble floor. She clutched a fraying teddy bear so tightly that it seems looked ready to burst. Kneeling beside her was Sophia Reyes, the live-in nanny Ethan had hired only 2 weeks ago after the last one quit without explanation. Sophia's hand rested lightly on the girl's back. Her voice was low but steady. "You're safe, Leia. I promise. No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." The words weren't extraordinary, but it was how she said them, like they mattered. Leia's body trembled, but she didn't shrink away. There was no panic in her shoulders, no recoiling. She was listening. And more than that, she was comforted. Ethan's throat tightened. He had seen caregivers come and go over the years, competent, well-dressed professionals who spoke in measured tones and managed Leia like a project. None had spoken like this. None had been allowed this close. He stepped forward. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, his voice quieter than he expected. Sophia looked up, startled, but didn't rise. She kept her hand where it was. "Good evening, Mr. Cole," she replied, calm as before. Then she turned back to the child. "Your father's home." Leia lifted her head. Her lips trembled. "Daddy," she whispered. Ethan dropped to his knees without thinking. "I'm here, sweetheart." She hesitated. Then she crossed the space between them and threw her arms around his neck. Her small frame shook with sobs. He held her, his hand on the back of her head, and something sharp twisted in his chest. He had no words for what he felt, but he knew it wasn't new. It had just gone unnoticed. The spell broke minutes later with the echo of stilettos on polished wood. Victoria descended the grand staircase, a silk dress clinging to her, as if she were on a runway rather than at home. Her makeup was flawless, her pearl necklace perfectly centered. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, lips pressed into a neutral line. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "You're home early." "I finished in the city and drove straight back." "Well, I'm leaving," she announced, moving toward the console table lined with luxury handbags. "The yacht club fundraiser won't wait." Her eyes flicked to Leia, who stood clutching Ethan's hand, and then to Sophia, still kneeling nearby. "She had another episode," Victoria said with a casual shrug. At least Sophia managed to calm her down. Ethan's eyes shifted to the nanny. "Was it an episode?" Sophia shook her head gently. "No, sir." She was frightened. "I helped her feel safe again." "There, you see," Victoria said, slipping her lipstick into her purse. "Nothing dramatic. Leia tends to dramatize." "Did she have lunch?" Ethan asked his daughter. Leia shook her head. "I'm hungry, Daddy." Victoria snapped around. "She ate. Don't let her manipulate you." Ethan stiffened. Leia shrank beside him. Sophia stepped forward slightly, voice still calm. "She eats well when she feels safe." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "How long have you been here?" "A little over a week, ma'am." "And already giving me parenting advice?" Sophia didn't flinch. "She's Mr. Cole's daughter. I only want to help." Ethan's grip on Leia's hand tightened as he felt his daughter lean towards Sophia, just slightly, instinctively. It wasn't a gesture of preference. It was a cry for safety. Leia's voice cut through the tension. "Daddy, I can count." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Really? Show me." She nodded and began counting softly. 1, 2, 3. By the time she reached 15, Ethan had to look away to hide the tears stinging his eyes. "She learned that?" he asked. Sophia smiled. "She knows more, sir. She just needed someone to show her how to believe it." Victoria scoffed. 7 years old and counting to 15? Not exactly genius. "I see progress," Ethan said flatly. "And that matters." For the first time, Victoria looked rattled. She grabbed her Chanel purse, sprayed perfume into the air, and snapped. "Don't coddle her, Ethan. She needs reality, not illusions." Then she was gone, leaving behind her perfume and something colder. The next morning, Ethan stayed home. Instead of chasing meetings, he sat quietly in the kitchen as sunlight spilled across the countertops. Leia was at the table beside Sophia, carefully sorting crayons. "This one is red," she said proudly. "And this is green." "Yellow." Ethan watched, stunned. It wasn't just that she knew her colors. It was the way her voice carried now, steadier, fuller. "I can count too," Leia announced and began again, beaming as she reached 15. Sophia gently tapped her shoulder with every number. Encouragement without pressure. Support without smothering. Ethan realized something horrifying. In 1 week, this woman had seen more of his daughter than he had in 7 years. And now, as Leia painted with her fingers, laughing when she smeared blue across the paper, Ethan made a decision he hadn't considered in years. "I want to take her to the park." Sophia looked at him, surprised, then nodded. That afternoon, the park by the Charles River glowed in the sunlight. Ethan walked hand in hand with Leia through the gates, Sophia beside them like a quiet guardian. "Daddy, I smell the grass," Leia said, face tilted upward. "And I hear birds." Ethan smiled. "What do you want to do first?" "The swings." Ethan helped her onto the swing, securing the chains. Sophia placed a steadying hand on her back. "Ready, princess?" he asked. She nodded. "Higher, Daddy." And as the swing rose and her laughter echoed across the park, Ethan Cole realized he was hearing something rarer than wealth. His daughter's joy. Later that night, as the quiet of the house settled over them, Leia was curled on the couch beside her father. Sophia had gone to prepare tea, and Ethan had just returned from locking the doors. He unbuttoned his shirt collar, relaxing for the first time in days, when a question drifted from his daughter's lips. "Daddy, why does Victoria hate my drawings?" Ethan froze mid-step. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Without answering, Leia slid from the couch, reached for his hand, and led him gently into the kitchen. She pointed toward the silver trash bin. Ethan opened the lid and stared. Inside were torn pieces of bright-colored paper. He reached in, pulling out scraps, a stick figure holding a little girl's hand. Brown hair, a soft smile. Even without a signature, it was unmistakable. It was Sophia. "And Leia." "She said I was wasting time," Leia whispered, and ripped them all. Ethan felt the burn of shame rise in his chest. Not at his daughter. At himself, for not seeing, not asking, not knowing. And then he noticed something else. Dark marks, faint but visible, on his daughter's arm. He gently rolled up her sleeve. Bruises. Small, but clearly hand-shaped. He bent down, his voice barely a whisper. "Leia, who did this to you?" She looked away. Her voice trembled. "When I drop things, Victoria grabs me. She says I need to learn. To be strong." Sophia had just returned to the doorway. She stood silently, her face pale. "I didn't want to interfere," she finally said, "but I've seen it. Victoria skips meals for her. She shouts for the smallest things. Once, I heard her say if Leia told anyone, she'd be sent away." Ethan turned to her, his voice rough. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid. I didn't think you'd believe me." The silence between them wasn't accusation. It was understanding, shared guilt. But then came the sound that always carried warning. Heels. Victoria walked in, all perfume and posture. "What's going on?" Ethan stepped forward. "We need to talk." She narrowed her eyes. "About what?" He held up the torn drawings. "These. And the bruises." Her mask cracked, just for a second. Then it returned. "Leia exaggerates. Kids fall. And those drawings were nonsense. Doodles." "I heard it from Leia." Sophia saw it. Victoria's eyes blazed. "You'd take her word over mine?" Sophia stepped in, calm and deliberate. "I'm not against you, Mrs. Cole. I'm for Leia." That was the moment it all broke. Victoria folded her arms and hissed. "So what now? You choose them over me? That fragile child and her nanny?" Ethan looked down at his daughter, who was clinging to his hand, then up at the woman he had once called his partner. "I choose my daughter," he said quietly, but each word carried the weight of finality. "And I won't let anyone hurt her again. Ever." Victoria stared at him for a heartbeat too long. Then, voice trembling with rage, she spat. "You'll regret this." She grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and walked out. The sound of the front door slamming was almost cinematic. But no one spoke. Leia climbed into her father's arms and whispered, "She's not coming back, right?" Ethan held her tightly. No, sweetheart. And I promise, I will never leave you. The house, once filled with tension, slowly began to breathe again. That evening, Sophia made chicken soup while Leia set the table with spoons that clinked loudly as she fumbled, but her smile never faded. She was proud of herself. Ethan watched her every move with a kind of reverence he couldn't explain. Can I pick dessert tonight? Leia asked. Of course, princess. Then I want vanilla ice cream. I want to eat it with my second mom. Sophia froze, soup ladle halfway to the bowl. What did you say? Ethan asked softly. My second mom, Leia said again. I have one in heaven. And now I have one here. Sophia's eyes shimmered. She knelt beside the girl and pulled her into a hug. If you want me to be, she whispered, I'll always be your second mom. That night, laughter returned to the dining table. Leia told stories from the park. Ethan tried telling jokes and failed spectacularly, and Sophia smiled, watching the two of them with something between hope and awe. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt that this house had become something else entirely. A home. In the days following Victoria's departure, the mansion transformed in ways no renovation could have managed. The silence that once blanketed the halls with cold restraint gave way to music, sometimes Leia's humming, sometimes Ethan's quiet playlists, sometimes the accidental clatter of kitchen experiments gone wrong. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan stopped running toward his job and started walking toward his daughter. Each morning, Leia came down for breakfast with something new to share, a dream, a question, a half-remembered melody she wanted to learn. And each time, Ethan listened. He really listened. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen's tall windows, Leia's voice rang out clearly. Daddy, aren't you going to work today? Ethan set down his coffee. I'm working right here, princess. She blinked behind her glasses. From home. He nodded and ruffled her hair. That way, I can eat breakfast with you, and hear all your stories, and help you water the garden. Her hug was fierce. I love that. That means I won't feel alone anymore. It struck him like a confession. He had no idea how long she had felt alone in her own home. Sophia, ever patient, had started inviting Leia into the kitchen, not as a guest, but as a participant. You hold the spoon like this, she'd say gently, and feel for the edges of the bowl. Your hands will tell you what your eyes can't. The first time they made pancakes together, flour ended up everywhere, on the counter, on the floor, even in Leia's hair. She squealed with laughter, and Ethan, watching from the doorway, couldn't help but join in. You've got flour on your nose, he told Sophia. She looked up, mock serious. That's how you know they're homemade. But cooking was only the beginning. Sophia began introducing small art projects into their routine. Most parents, Ethan suspected, would have hesitated to hand a visually impaired child a paintbrush. But not Sophia. Leia didn't paint inside the lines. She painted over them, vibrantly, enthusiastically, with a kind of unfiltered emotional honesty. This is our family, she announced one afternoon, handing Ethan a fresh drawing. 3 figures, simple but unmistakable, a tall man, a woman with long brown hair, and a small girl between them, all holding hands. This is you. This is Mom Sophia. And this is me. Ethan's eyes stung. He pulled her into his arms. Sophia, standing quietly nearby, said nothing, but her hand instinctively pressed to her chest. She hadn't felt this warmth in years. Out in the backyard, a new ritual took root. Leia declared she wanted to start a garden. Not a perfect one. Not one designed by landscapers. Her own. She wanted to plant sunflowers. Because they always turn to the sun, she explained. Just like I'll always turn toward Daddy and Mom Sophia. Ethan knelt beside her in the soil, his hands dirtier than they had ever been, and smiled. Then let's plant a whole field of them. Each evening, the 3 of them watered the garden together. Leia wore oversized gloves, her hands clumsy but determined. Sophia kept a steadying hand nearby, only stepping in when truly needed. With every new seed they planted, a little more of the old house fell away. The walls no longer echoed with neglect. They reverberated with life. Leia changed. She wasn't just calmer. She was more curious, more confident. She asked questions now. She tried things. She laughed without fear. Sophia had a saying. You don't have to see the world to feel it. Your heart, your mind, and your hands, they're your real eyes. Ethan found himself borrowing that line. He also found himself watching Sophia more often, not just as a caregiver, but as a woman who had brought light into his home, not with grand gestures, but with simple, unwavering presence. At night, when Leah was asleep, Ethan and Sophia sometimes lingered in the kitchen, drinking tea, talking softly about the day. It was easy, and, increasingly, it felt like it was supposed to be this way all along. Then came the envelope. One gray afternoon, the mailman delivered a thick legal packet. Ethan flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with every paragraph. Victoria had filed for custody. In the documents, she argued that Ethan was unfit to manage the specialized needs of a disabled child and claimed Leah would be better served in a professional boarding school. She also demanded a significant division of marital assets. Ethan tossed the papers onto the table. She wants to take Leah away from me just to prove something. She wants her raised in a place that will turn her into a project. His attorney, a calm man named Harris, reviewed the file. We have strong documentation of neglect, multiple testimonies, medical evaluations, but courts often lean toward stability. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Harris met his eyes. If you and Sophia were married, Leah would have a complete legal household, a stable family. It would remove any ambiguity in the court's eyes. It was a practical suggestion, a strategic maneuver, but it left Ethan reeling, not because it was absurd, but because it wasn't. That evening, Ethan couldn't sit still. He paced through the house, through the rooms where laughter had recently replaced echoes, where a child had started to blossom because someone finally saw her. Sophia was in the living room, folding a blanket over Leah's sleeping form. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then took a breath. Sophia, I need to say something. And if I don't say it now, I'll regret it. She turned to him, surprised by the tremor in his voice. When Harris mentioned marriage, I dismissed it. I thought, it's just for custody, just a formality. He stepped closer. But tonight, watching you with Leah, I realized it's not about custody. It's about you. It's always been about you. He reached for her hand. I love the patience in your voice, the strength in your silences. I love the way you see Leah, not as fragile, but as powerful. You see things I never saw. You love with a kind of quiet that changes people. His voice cracked. And I don't just want you here for Leah. I want you here for me. For us. I don't want a strategy. I want a family. I want a life, with you in it. Sophia's eyes shimmered. She opened her mouth, then paused. I felt it too, she whispered. But I was afraid. Afraid you only needed me. That I was just filling a gap. He shook his head. You're not a substitute. You're the heart of this family. And if you'll say yes, let's build something real. Not for courtrooms. For us. In the quiet that followed, neither of them moved. Neither needed to. The answer was in her eyes before she even said it. Yes. They chose simplicity. No champagne towers, no media coverage. Just a backyard ceremony under the old oak tree behind the house, strung with paper lanterns and surrounded by blooming wildflowers that Leah had helped pick. The chairs were mismatched. The guests were few. A neighbor, a family friend, the woman from the bakery who always slipped Leah an extra cookie. But the mood, warm, real, undeniable, felt more sacred than any cathedral. Leah wore a soft pink dress and a crown of daisies. She held a small basket of petals and walked the makeshift aisle with careful, delighted steps, scattering color as she went. Sophia stood waiting in a modest white dress, radiant not in extravagance, but in presence. A woman who had never planned to be a bride again, now becoming one because love had found her in the ashes. Ethan, standing at the altar, forgot how to breathe when he saw her. The officiant spoke with gentleness and brevity, but the only line anyone truly remembered came when he asked, "Do you promise to love and care for each other, and for Leah, in all the days to come?" And together, without hesitation, they said, "We promise." Leah clapped, giggling. Now we're a real family. That broke the crowd into laughter and a few quiet tears. Sophia knelt and embraced her. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "you will never be alone again." A week later, the court delivered its decision. Victoria's lawsuit was dismissed, completely, unequivocally. The documentation of her emotional neglect, the visible bruises, the psychological assessments, and above all, the newly formed family's visible stability, it was overwhelming. There was no argument left to make. The judge concluded that Leah was now living in a safe, nurturing, and emotionally supportive environment with both biological and legal guardians. Outside the courthouse, Ethan lifted his daughter into his arms. "No one will ever take you away from me again, princess." And this time, he didn't just believe it. He knew it. Their home bloomed. The shadows that had once gathered in the corners, silent tension, repressed guilt, emotional absence, were replaced by music, scent, and joy. The kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and something baking. Leia's laughter echoed from the hallways. Sophia's hum accompanied the clatter of pots and pans. Ethan worked less, not because he had lost ambition, but because his priorities had finally aligned with his values. He made coffee in the mornings. He walked Leia to school. He stood beside her during every therapy session and clapped at every breakthrough, no matter how small. Sophia didn't just mother Leia. She mentored her. They cooked together, painted together, gardened until their hands were dirty and their cheeks were red from laughter. One day, Leia handed Ethan a new drawing. 3 figures again, just like before. But this time, the figures had smiles wider than the page could hold. Above them, in Leia's careful block letters, it read, "My family." Seasons passed. The garden behind the house thrived, not because of expert landscaping, but because it was touched every day by small hands and big hope. The sunflowers grew tall, turning always toward the light, just like Leia said they would. Sophia's presence brought something Ethan hadn't even realized he'd been missing, a sense of steadiness. She wasn't dramatic, wasn't performative. She was the calm under the storm, the center that held even when days were rough. One night, as they tucked Leia in, she whispered, "I dreamed of my first mommy." Ethan's breath caught. "Can you tell me?" She was smiling. "In a garden." She said, "She's happy I have a second mom now." She said Sophia is a gift. Sophia's hand covered her mouth. Ethan kissed Leia's forehead. "Your mommy will always be part of you. And I think she is happy. I think she's watching us every day." Leia nodded. "I feel her." And then one morning, it was Sophia who felt something different. She stared at the calendar, did the math in her head. Then again, she didn't say anything immediately. But by the 3rd day, her hand rested on her stomach like it already knew. A test confirmed it. Then a doctor. Ethan stared at the sonogram image with wide eyes and trembling fingers. "You're going to be a mom again," he whispered. She corrected him with a smile. "We are." Pregnancy changed the rhythm of the house, but not its joy. Leia was over the moon. "I'm going to be a big sister." She'd shout to anyone who'd listen, including the mailman, the grocery delivery guy, and an unsuspecting jogger who waved back in confusion. Sophia walked a little slower now, cooked a little less, and Ethan, in a complete role reversal, started asking what she needed before she had to say a word. "Do you want vanilla ice cream?" "It's 9 in the morning, Ethan." "I'll take that as a yes." Their baby boy was born in the spring. They named him William, a nod to strength, legacy, and the quiet resilience that ran through their family like a hidden river. Leia held him for the first time and whispered, "You're safe now. We all are." Sophia cried harder than she expected. Ethan did too, because in that moment, nothing from the past mattered. Not the silence, not the failures, not the guilt. All that mattered was the warmth of the room, the breath of a newborn, and the knowledge that they had built something whole, something enduring. Leia, once fragile and hesitant, now stood tall, figuratively, if not yet literally. She flourished at her new school. She made friends. She joined art classes, learned songs in Braille, and painted vivid worlds that lived only in her mind and heart. One of her paintings, a bright swirl of yellows and blues, hung framed in the living room. She titled it, without hesitation, Sunflower Light. Sophia taught her how to knead dough with confidence, how to find balance without sight, and how to advocate for herself without apology. "You don't need eyes to see your worth," she'd say. "You just need to believe that you matter." On William's first birthday, Leia stood up at the small backyard party and announced, "I'm writing a book." Ethan raised a brow. "A book?" She nodded. "It's about a girl who couldn't see the world, so she decided to feel it instead." Sophia hugged her tightly. "That sounds like a story worth reading." But peace has a way of drawing attention. Sophia and Ethan received an invitation. A local school for visually impaired children wanted them to come speak. Not as experts, but as parents who had witnessed transformation, not just in their daughter, but in themselves. The speech was short, humble. But what mattered were the conversations afterward. The parents who approached them with tears in their eyes and questions in their hearts. How did you do it? Where did you find hope? Ethan's answer was always the same. I didn't find it. I listened to it. In a child's voice. In a woman's quiet courage. And in that moment, he realized they weren't just raising a child. They were raising a story of second chances. By the time William turned 3, the Cole household had settled into something both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the way mornings began with cereal and spilled juice. Ordinary in the chaotic school drop-offs, the hunt for missing shoes, the bedtime books read with one eye open. Ordinary in the laundry never folded on time, the broken coffee machine, and the growing list of minor repairs Ethan never quite got around to. But extraordinary in the way Leah laughed. In the way she sang to her baby brother, guiding his tiny hands to explore the world like she had once been taught. Extraordinary in how a once sterile mansion now breathed like a home, with fingerprints on the fridge and drawings taped to the walls without symmetry or shame. Ethan would often catch Sophia in the garden at dusk, holding William as Leah watered the sunflowers. He'd pause, every time, just to take in the scene. Not because it was grand, but because it was theirs. Sophia had returned to painting again, something she hadn't done since her first daughter's death. But now, her strokes weren't heavy with grief. They were filled with life, with color. She painted what she saw in Leah: resilience, imagination, fire. She painted Ethan once, too, not in a suit or behind a desk, but barefoot on the grass, carrying William on his shoulders while Leah laughed nearby. You made me look 10 years younger, he'd teased. I painted what I see, she replied with a wink. Leah's vision hadn't changed, but her world had. She'd learned to navigate the neighborhood, to make friends, to read in Braille faster than Ethan could follow along. She asked questions now that most adults would hesitate to voice, about death, love, injustice, belonging. Will other kids ever think I'm weird? Sophia answered without hesitation. Some might, but the right ones will think you're unforgettable. And if I get lost? You won't, Ethan would say. But if you do, use your voice. It's stronger than you know. They traveled, eventually. First small trips, apple orchards, beach towns, a cabin in Vermont. Then, gradually, further, a train to Chicago, a flight to the Grand Canyon. Always with care, always with intention. Leah's sense of direction was uncanny. She'd listen to the rhythm of the world and somehow map it in her mind. At the canyon's edge, she turned her face to the wind and whispered, I can feel the size of it. Ethan smiled. It's enormous. I know, she said, but not bigger than how I feel right now. Sophia once confided in Ethan that she feared she'd never love again. Not fully. Not after burying a child. Not after carrying the guilt that comes with outliving someone you were supposed to protect. But Leah changed that. Not by replacing her daughter, but by revealing that love isn't finite. That the heart, when broken, doesn't shrink. It stretches. One night, as they sat on the porch, wine glasses half empty, she said it out loud. I thought I was done. But loving Leah healed something I thought would never stop bleeding. Ethan took her hand. And you healed things in her, and in me, that I didn't even know were broken. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. I never expected this life, Sophia murmured. Ethan smiled faintly. Neither did I, but I can't imagine another. Years passed. Slowly, then all at once. William started school. Leah turned 13. Ethan began writing again, something he hadn't done since college. Short essays, memoirs. He even considered a book. Tentative title, The Sunflower House. One afternoon, he found Leah curled up with a recorder, dictating a story. It's about a girl who couldn't see, but could feel things others couldn't. And she meets a woman who lost something big, and a man who was always too busy. And together, they build a house made of music, cake, paint, and plants. He smiled. Sounds familiar. It's fiction, she said with a smirk, but based on a true story. Sophia opened a small art studio downtown. Not a business venture, more of a sanctuary. A place for children with disabilities to create without instruction, without limitation. No one's correcting brushstrokes in here, she'd say. Leah would sometimes guide younger kids, showing them how to choose color palettes by touch or music. They called her Miss Leah, and she wore the title like a badge of honor. Ethan, ever the pragmatic one, offered to set up a website for the studio. Sophia refused. Let it grow slow. Word of mouth. We're not trying to brand love. He didn't argue. Victoria never came back. There were occasional letters. Cold, brief, legal. But Leia never asked about her, and Ethan never pushed. That chapter was closed. Not with hatred, but with clarity. Some people, Ethan had learned, aren't meant to be in the rooms they once helped decorate. And that's all right. One autumn evening, with William asleep and Leia in her room composing a poem, Sophia and Ethan sat by the fire. He pulled out a photograph. It was one of the early days. Leia on the swing, Sophia pushing, Ethan kneeling in front of her, arms open. She was smiling even then, he said. She always had it in her. She just needed space. He looked at her. Thank you. Sophia raised a brow. For what? For being her space. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. You were hers, too. You just needed to show up. Their story wasn't grand in the way tabloids measured drama. It didn't trend. No film rights were sold. No memoir made the bestseller list. But in a house once filled with cold floors and colder glances, now stood a family of 4. A father who learned to be present. A woman who turned grief into generosity. A boy who grew up bathed in love. And a girl who couldn't see, but taught everyone around her what it really means to look. Not with eyes, but with heart.